All right, what we're about to break down here is basically a protocol for the impossible. We're going to dive into the science and the psychology behind one of the most extreme survival stories you've probably ever heard of. But we're not just going to focus on what happened. Nope. We're looking at the series of critical, tiny decisions that literally made the difference between life and death, especially when all hope seemed completely gone.
So, where does it all begin? With a simple, just absolutely terrifying fact. A plane is way off course, landing in a place it was never, ever supposed to be. And the silence after the impact, that was somehow even more shocking than the crash itself.
The way the story is told, it's with these really jarring, fragmented thoughts. Not on a mountain, not in freezing silence, not broken in half. You could almost feel it, right? It just throws you right into that same sense of total disorientation that the survivors must have been feeling.
And here's the thing. When the official rescue teams looked at the situation, they marked everyone as lost, a total loss. But they made a huge mistake, because somehow, against all the odds, against all logic, some of them had survived.
And that's really what this whole breakdown is about. We're not just here to retell a story you might have heard. We are going to analyze the protocol, the actual step-by-step choices they made under the most insane pressure imaginable. Okay, so first thing you've got to understand is that this whole thing started as a completely normal, routine flight. And that, right there, is the key to why aviation survival is so different. It's not like you're going on a camping trip and you pack a survival kit. No one on that plane was mentally prepared for this. You don't expect to have to fight for your life. So let's get into the physics of the crash for a second. It's pretty fascinating. The plane didn't just explode in a fireball. It actually broke apart. Now, that sounds totally catastrophic, right? But what it did was distribute the massive force of the impact. Think of it like spreading the energy out instead of focusing it all in one spot. And that, scientifically speaking, is the only reason anyone survived that initial crash. So in that first hour, man, the survivors were just running on pure shock and instinct. The source material paints this picture of total confusion, this eerie silence, and people just moving almost automatically. Rational thought completely out the window. But this was the critical moment, that first window where the very first and most important decisions had to be made. And their first decision? It was absolutely brilliant in how simple it was. Before they did anything else, they used the biggest piece of the wrecked plane as a shelter, just to get out of the wind. You have to remember, at that altitude, the cold isn't just a problem, it's an immediate killer. It's way more dangerous in the short term than hunger, or even some of their injuries. That one move, it probably saved more lives than any other single decision they made. This right here gets to the absolute core of survival science. Most people, if you ask them, they think food is the #1 priority, but it's not. It's shelter. By instinctively just focusing on blocking that wind and making some kind of survivable space, they were following the correct protocol without even knowing it. They got the order right. At first, of course, every single survivor is thinking the same thing. Rescue is on its way. They'll be here in a few hours. That's just the normal human expectation. But the real test, the psychological battle, that begins when that hope starts to fade. When the silence of the mountains stretches from just a few hours into days, and then more days. And this timeline here, it really shows you that slow, agonizing drain of hope. Look, by day 8, they're starting to ration what little they have, a super disciplined, smart choice. But unknown to them, by day 10, the official search efforts are already being scaled back. And then, oh man, the absolute gut punch on day 14. They see a plane fly overhead, but it just keeps going. It doesn't see them. That's the moment it hits them. They are truly, completely alone. This forced a massive mental shift. They had to go from being these passive victims just waiting for help to becoming active agents in their own survival. And how'd they do it? They created a structure. They assigned roles. You're on medical duty, you're in charge of the food, you help maintain the shelter. Having a purpose, that's what kept their minds from just completely collapsing. And then came the part of the story that's the most difficult to talk about. The food didn't just get low, it was gone, completely gone. And at this stage, biologically, your body starts to consume its own muscle tissue just to stay alive. They were facing a massive, immediate calorie crisis. So the group was standing at this huge crossroads. And as you can see here, one path is denial. And in this situation, denial is a death sentence. It kills you faster. The only other path? Adaptation.
They had to make a choice that is just uninkable. But it wasn't driven by panic or emotion. It was driven by pure, cold biological necessity. It was the only logical decision left that could possibly lead to survival. Now, this next part is a detail that gets missed so often, but it is absolutely critical. They didn't just descend into chaos. They actually created a social contract. They established rules, they made consent agreements, they built a structure around this terrible decision. And that protocol, that's what kept them human. It's what stopped the group from tearing itself apart. Order, you see, is a survival tool. So after weeks and weeks of waiting, another big strategic shift happens. They realize that waiting wasn't a strategy anymore. It was just a guarantee of a slow death. So the new plan became, if rescue can't find us, then we have to go find rescue. I mean, talk about the ultimate gamble. Staying put meant they had a 0% chance of making it out alive. Leaving the relative safety of that fuselage to trek through the Andes Mountains, incredibly dangerous. But it was the only option that had any chance of success, no matter how tiny that chance was. And you know what? Their trek wasn't just a blind stumble through the snow. They used logic. They followed the slope, figuring that the direction water would flow had to lead to lower elevations, and eventually, maybe, civilization. And after days of this absolutely brutal trek, they saw it. The first sign of human life. It proved their calculated gamble was the right call. Can you imagine the scene when the rescue helicopters finally did arrive at the crash site? The crews were just stunned, not only because people were actually alive, but because they found a completely organized, managed survival camp. This wasn't just luck. Survival for them hadn't been an accident. It had been a project. So what really saved them? It wasn't just vague things like hope or the will to survive. No, it was a series of concrete, disciplined actions. That immediate focus on shelter, the strict control over rations, the group structure and giving everyone a job, the routines, and finally, that active, deliberate decision to move. It was a protocol made up of one correct choice after another. And this, right here, this really gets to the core of this whole breakdown. We often ask the wrong question. We ask, how did they endure that? But survival isn't just about passively enduring something. The better question, the more useful one, is about action. It's what were the specific step-by-step things they did that kept them alive for one more day and then another. There's a quote from the source material that just says it all perfectly. Survival is not one big act. It's hundreds of small correct choices. It's not about one single heroic moment. It's about the total sum of all these tiny, difficult, correct decisions they made while they were scared and weak and totally uncertain. Look, most of us will never face a plane crash in the mountains, but we all face pressure. We all face our own impossible situations. So the real question this story leaves us with is this. When things get tough for you, what are the small, correct, disciplined choices that make up your protocol for getting through it?